So he filmed, he spent about a year in my class observing, then he filmed a semester of the World Peace Game over about 10 sessions. We played once a week for about an hour and a half in 2006, and then the game was won. And Chris filmed that, and it took about 6 years for him to raise the funds to actually finish the film. And when he did, the film was sent out to festivals with little hope, you know. We thought we'd show it on his living room wall to his friends. But it was accepted at the South by Southwest Film Festival in Austin, Texas, in the U.S. And there, I went to Europe, and I have to say the Europeans were so supportive of this message and the understanding of the mission. The Bergen International Film Festival, where Chris entered this film, out of 145 international films, this little film, World Peace and Other Fourth Grade Achievements, was given the #1 audience prize. We were literally stunned. I mean, we were shocked. The joke is, Chris says, you know, it's a good film in spite of you being in it, you know. But it just shows what little efforts on our part ended up being a much larger thing. And so now I feel a greater responsibility because I look at the film and I see not just myself and my teaching in this game, but I see teaching and teachers, and I feel like I have a responsibility now. I can't represent well, but to try and just say that there's better teaching, there's good teaching, and they may not have cameras in their classrooms, but there are far better teachers than I all over. And so today we have films that are not so positive about education, and our film is trying to say that, yes, beyond even the classroom, there are many good examples, better examples even, of teaching. So this game, you may have seen some of the clips on the internet, YouTube and so forth. It's a 4-foot by 4-foot by 4-foot plexiglass structure with 4 layers. There are 4-foot by 4-foot sheets of plexiglass. And the lowest level is the undersea level. You have undersea mining and submarine warfare. The next level is ground and sea level, where we have universities, towns, cities, armies, navies, factories, everything we have here, terrain, animals. And then on the higher level, which is about at the 4th graders, the 9-year-olds, about their shoulder level, you've got the aircraft level with big puffs of cotton that they push around for weather and territorial airspace marked off to above the ground and countries below on the ground and sea level. And air forces, of course, all over international airspace and territorial airspace. And on the top level, they've got outer space with asteroid mining and black holes and killer and research satellites and space stations and solar power plants, all kinds of things that we aspire to or have in our life. I tried to emulate the entire planet in this clear, comprehensive plexiglass structure so they could see everything, grasp everything at once. I divided them into 4 country teams, each team on a section of the board below. And each team has different assets. They have a cabinet of a prime minister, secretary of state, a minister of defense, and a CFO or chief financial officer. There's a World Bank body of students. There's a United Nations body. And there are even arms dealers. I wanted to play that side of human nature into the equation also. We have a weather goddess, usually it's a goddess, sometimes it's a god, who pushes those big puffs of cotton around and controls a random stock market and also the random weather and events that occur that happen to every country when they take their turns. The countries take their turns, they have a declaration period, and then we all go into a general negotiation period. A lot of chaos, a lot of noise. And then we reconvene, and the next team takes its turn until we go 1 round. That's 1 game a day. I give them 13 pages of crises, a crisis document with interlocking problems, global problems, everything from ethnic and minority and religious rights to water scarcity, to desertification, breakaway republics, endangered species, nuclear proliferation, toxic and hazardous waste spills, environmental issues, everything I could think of that we have in our world, I tried to integrate into this 1 equation. And I made it so that if they change or attack 1 problem, everything else changes. So that everything's interrelated, as I perceived it really is in life. So you have to have a more comprehensive view. And lastly, I put in a saboteur. This is a student, usually my highest functioning student. This is the student that's always in the office. He's always in with the headmaster, the principal, always in trouble. And I've used that skill set, that adverse skill set to our benefit. That student is asked to play a dual role. They're on one hand playing their public job in the World Peace Game, trying to create or meet the 2 ends of the game. That is to solve all 50 problems and to raise every country's asset value above the starting point. Those are the two goals. While they're doing that publicly, they're also trying to, at the same time, secretly, through innuendo, ambiguities, irrelevancies, misdirection, misinformation. They can't lie outright, but they can misdirect. They're trying to destroy the entire world peace game. That's my purpose and function for that student. It gives that particular student a great opportunity. And at the end of the game, that student is always amazingly celebrated and applauded by everyone else for making the challenge for all of us much deeper and more interesting. So that's essentially the game in a nutshell. And I could just share with you a couple of stories from the game. And I believe we're going to open it up so we can talk and have questions at the end. But the game is not a right or wrong kind of thing. You know, in our situation with testing now being the engine that drives everything, I've actually tried to go against that because I see policy as kind of like weather. Policy comes and goes. Sometimes it's bright and sunny, sometimes it's a horrible storm. But what I've found to be the basic situation is that the relationship between the educator and the student, between the administrator and the teacher, is primary, is crucial no matter the policy. Some policies you simply have to cover your head and wait till they go away. You might take a few things out of them that are good. Other policies are wonderful. But regardless of the policy, what remains is the relationship and the execution or the living out of that relationship to the best of our abilities with our students. That remains in any situation. And so that relationship is what drives the game and makes it possible. So in our game, I have a deep relationship with the students. I have a pull-out program. They come once a week. They're not all gifted and talented, though that's my mandate. Now the definition is much broader, and students have access whether they test gifted or not. So I see all kinds of students coming through. But we have to have a relationship to begin. And with that relationship, they have to then develop intellectual stamina to be able to stay in situations with no definite specific resolution or solution for a longer period of time, going deeper into critical and creative thinking without solutions popping up for immediate gratification. That is a beautiful thing to allow that deepening of learning to occur without the need for instant answers, instant success. You know, when they all raise their hands and you call on one and everybody else puts their hands down, their heads down, they've disengaged. I'm sure you don't do that, but it has been my experience that that's the way things are often done. And so in the game, I had a relationship, and in one game, we had a very poor country. And you might have heard this story before. A little girl, Amy, was the Minister of Defense in a very poor country. A country had very few assets, an Arctic ice-locked country, but it was right next door to a desert country, not, of course, real world topography here. And Amy was instructed by her Prime Minister, Marcy, to sit still and don't do anything because we don't have any money. We don't want to irritate any big country that might get us in trouble. But Amy felt she had to do something. She saw a problem and nobody would listen to her. So out of the blue, for no reason at all, Amy attacked this large oil-rich neighbor to her south. There was no reason for it. She marched her tank column and sent her air force and brought her infantry in a lightning strike, surrounded that country's oil fields and locked it down and held it, realizing that that country could not attack her because they might destroy their own resources. So she was in a very powerful position, but we didn't understand why. Everyone was upset. Amy, why are you doing this? What's wrong with you? This is the world peace game. Don't you understand? And I myself was feeling I was failing as a teacher. I'm trying to instill or hope for compassion and deeper thinking and more peaceful ideals. That's my secret hope. But when they begin the game, they can ignore everything I wish. My baggage goes out of the way, and they make of the game what they will. And so Amy simply folded her arms and said, I know what I'm doing. She wouldn't answer any questions. She wouldn't change her mind. Her Prime Minister, Marcy, was upset. Everyone was upset. And come to find out, a few game days later, a few rounds of the board where we take our turns, it was revealed that the Prime Minister of that country, that large, wealthy, oil-rich neighbor of Amy's, was planning a secret attack to dominate the entire world militarily. That's just the kind of person that little Prime Minister was. Amy somehow saw the vectors and trend lines of this becoming. She saw things coming to be, and she made a philosophical decision to go against everyone's opinion and wise thinking and do something totally against the nature of our intent, which is create a small war. She created a small war to avert a much larger war, and she succeeded. But we had to stop the game and really discuss the deeper implications of Amy's thinking. And you can imagine a 9-year-old being able to understand not only that there's no way out but to do something against the grain, but then to hold her own peace until it became clear and hope that she's correct. She could have been wrong, but she was correct. And I found out years later, of course, that this was the case, and she had planned it, she had understood it. She saw these things coming to be, and she took an action she knew had to be taken. There was no other way for her. So I admire that kind of courage and the kind of thinking it forced us all into and all to do. And I'll tell you the story of Pablo. I haven't told this story before. It's going to be in the book coming out in April. Pablo was a student who's, I guess you would not suspect to be a leader. This is a story about students we don't often see as leaders or as great in any way. Pablo was about as wide as he was tall. Very squat little fellow, and his hair stuck up on his head, and he had big glasses, thick glasses, and he talked very, very slowly. Pablo spoke in a monotone as well. He would take forever to explain anything, and whenever his hand went up in the classroom, all the other students put their heads down because they knew Pablo was going to take a long time to get whatever he was thinking about. But for some reason, I asked Pablo to accept the position of prime minister. I can choose the leaders in the game. That's one of the few options I have. I can choose the leaders. And I asked Pablo to be a prime minister. He slowly accepted. And I can see all the other children going, Mr. Hunter, why did you do that? It's going to be a very long game. But Pablo accepted. And then my heart was broken once again because Pablo didn't live up to my hopes, my expectations. He said hardly anything, and he took forever to say it. The game went on. Usually prime ministers, their first turn and declarations, they make 5 or 6 moves. Pablo made 1, and his team just cringed. So 5, 6 weeks went by, and my heart is breaking and breaking for this poor child whom I put in this position, whom I had an intuition had something in him, but I could not see it. And suddenly one day, after about 6 weeks of play, Pablo stood up, and I could see it coming. His eyes were widened. His hands were trembling just a bit. He was shaking. He was moving. It seemed to be a little bit faster than usual. He moved to the board, and he said, I am Pablo Rodriguez. I am the Prime Minister of such and such country, and these are my declarations. And Pablo stepped to the board, and he made about 22 moves in 2 minutes. He moved on the outer space level, the aircraft level, the ground and sea level, the undersea level. He instructed his Minister of Defense to go troops here. He asked the CFO to write a check and pay the World Bank that. He made all things happen for himself and even solved several of the global crises in the process in one move. I was stunned. We were all stunned. I looked at him and said, Pablo, you see. He turned to me and said, Mr. Hunter, I see everything. I said, Pablo, you understand. Mr. Hunter, I understand everything. And there's a moment sometimes when the least of us exceeds our expectations, our hopes even. We cannot see everything. We cannot see the depth of every student. But we know that each child has a precious opportunity, a huge potential, if we can only facilitate a way to tap that, to allow it expression, to allow it to gather strength and to grow and to become something wonderful. So that's the story of Pablo. And I see I've got just a few minutes left, so I'll share just one more story with you. And this is how, again, my expectations, my baggage, my biases and prejudices got in the way, and the students, in their collective wisdom, saved me. This was a story about a student I offered the prime ministership to. And they can refuse these offices if they want to, but he accepted it. And Jarrett, then, as all the prime ministers do, chose his own cabinet and set about dominating the entire game and world. Jared was known as a bully in our school. I knew he was. Everyone knew he was very sophisticated, though. He never really got caught. But we all knew that he bullied and victimized younger and smaller children. And it was a very frustrating thing for us as teachers. This was years ago before we had bullying programs in place to deal with this. I was at a loss. I was failing. I had placed these children in a position of being victims in a game I had created, and my best hopes were being dashed by one student. I didn't know what to do until finally Jared began his conquest of the world, and he had conquered all but one country. There was one tiny country left, and he was about to send in his armies to take over. Now, he had absorbed the cabinets of all the countries he had taken over. So he had a huge cabinet, about 20, 25 students on his team alone, and maybe 2 or 3 of that last cabinet out there in the hinterlands. He was about ready to launch a tank strike. His battalion of armor was going in. And suddenly, this little girl, tiny Christy, stood up. She said, "I'd like to attempt a coup d'etat against Prime Minister Jared Forrest." We were stunned. You can have a coup d'etat in the game. You can do anything you want in the game. If you can afford it, your budget can afford it, and you can deal with the consequences, however many steps of consequences may result. We were shocked. She was risking everything, her relevance in the game, because she'd have to be exiled if she lost. She'd have to seek exile and asylum in the only country left, the one Jared was going to take down. But she stood up. Christy said, "I want to try the coup." The weather goddess brought out our coins. We do a weighted coin toss, and usually the weight is in the favor of the larger nation. They've got more power. And Christy lost. And she picked up her little lunchbox and her little sweater, and she headed on, sadly, on over to the last country to seek asylum. And we thought it was all over, and my heart broke even again. And then Marisol stood up. I want to have a coup d'etat, too, against Jared Forrest. She's taking the same risk. I didn't understand. Why would she do that? The game's over. We've lost. It's going to be a disaster. These students will forever be scarred. She had the coin toss. Our hopes went up, and our hopes were dashed again. She lost. She gathered up her things and proceeded to move around the room to the last country, to seek asylum. And then Benjamin stood up. "I want to have a coup d'etat against Jared." Jared's cabinet was in revolt. I didn't understand, but they did this 6 times. One right behind the other. Jared had no chance to institute any kind of military action because he was under threat of attack himself. Finally, the 6th go-round, the coup was successful, and Jared himself was exiled and had to humbly beg asylum in a country which graciously, I have to say, I'm proud to say, gave it to him. This collective wisdom of the students, I found out years later, they had planned this. They had planned to stand against tyranny. They had said, if you go down, she stands up. If she goes down, he stands up. If he goes down, I'm standing up. We will not allow this thing to continue. It's wrong. It's not right. And that's a decision I could not have planned for. I could not have taught. I could not imagine. But the students together collectively were able to develop an amazing solution to a problem where there was no way. This game, there is no solution to it. I don't know how to win it myself. I've created it to be almost impossible to do, over-complexifying and having faith that my 4th graders, rather than breaking it down into bite-sized pieces and baby steps, can actually tackle complexity. And because of that faith, I think, and because of their response, we've shown the film, the World Peace Game film, World Peace and Other 4th Grade Achievements at the United Nations. This is our 3rd trip coming up in April to the United States Pentagon. We were invited twice before. My students were invited there. They met Defense Secretary Leon Panetta and had a half-hour policy discussion with him, not a photo op, a real substantive discussion. And we're invited back in April this year to play the World Peace Game in the Pentagon, my 4th graders. Can you imagine how a small-town teacher must feel, how any teacher would feel for people, for adults to respect their children's ideas and ideals and their experience and their skills, so much so. So I'll finish by saying this is possible because of the help of so many people I'm standing on the shoulders of, including my colleagues and particularly my administrators, because it takes a visionary and trusting administrator-teacher relationship to be able to survive and do these kinds of out-of-the-box things. You know, to be able to turn my back on my administrator, know that I'm trusted and protected and I'm safe, and I can try something, and that failure is considered a part of the learning equation rather than as something to be avoided. That is just a part of life. And to accept failure as a natural part of growing takes the stigma off of it. Of course we're going to fail. All great people have in order to come to greatness. And so that we allow to be a part of the equation without the pain of stigma. And students can thrive knowing they're safe. They can try and they can grow. And they buy this fiction and think they really can save the world. And the ones I've heard back from years later, 20, 30 years later, tell me that the quality of their lives has been affected by that experience. And that, I think, is the most, even more than a teacher can hope for. So that is where I'll stop talking and hopefully hear from you about your experiences too and how we can help each other. And thank you, Kathy, Jenny, and Amnesty International for making this possible for people, for students who don't have a voice of their own and can't be heard.
Thank you so much, John. I think I speak for everybody, and I thank you for that inspiring and very touching presentation. It really brought home the reality of what it's like to work with young people and how amazing an experience that can be. We have a couple of questions, so we're just going to go straight in. A question from one of our participants. You mentioned that the modern focus on tests and exams and measurement. And in that sort of environment, have you found parents to be responsive to this approach to education? The approach of the peace game, parents to be,
parents.
Yeah,
it's a remarkable, surprising, and almost eerie kind of thing. In 35 years of doing this with all kinds of students in different kinds of schools, this is strange. Never ever had one complaint. It's odd. The only complaint I've ever really had is, Mr. Hunter, a parent said to me once, I hate this game. I said, well, why? What did we do? She said, I had to pick up my daughter, 3 of her girlfriends who played this game, and I had to drive them to a football match, soccer match, 3 hours away in my SUV. And the entire time, these loud 4th grade girls talked international policy, diplomacy, nuclear proliferation, refugee issues at the top of their voices for 3 hours, and then did it for 3 hours coming back. Mr. Hunter, I hate this game. That's really the only complaint we've had. I did have, because the game's not right, left, or center, the students make of it what they want to. I did have one parent who said to me before we began play that her son was not going to play this game. I didn't understand, so I asked her to come in and we talk about it. And she said, Mr. Hunter, we're not going to play this game. I said, could I ask why? And she said, well, there's going to be a religious event and an ascension of all of us into a higher place, and so there's really no need to be engaged in these kinds of problem-solving activities, so we're not going to be involved. And that was the only time I've ever had someone not be wholehearted about the experience. But we've gotten a lot of support from people who are politically right, left, and center, despite my pacifist leanings. So that's a kind of supportive thing for us, I think.
Okay, thank you. Another question relates to how you choose the Prime Minister position.
Yeah.
And the suggestion is, have you ever let the students do an election for the role, or do you think that would work?
I think it's a possible innovation I've never tried. What I often find is in elementary school elections, there are factors that play in that are not necessarily logistical or strategic. So what I do is I base it on a teacher's insight and wisdom. Even though I'm a facilitator, I still have a role. And although the students dominate and run and I concede power to them in the game, they run the game, there's still a teaching or facilitating role in that I have to gently and subtly give guidance without standing in the way of their will and their intentions, even if I believe they're incorrect or wrong or inaccurate. And I often believe that, and I'm often wrong. So there's a relationship, and I choose a student I feel intuitively there is a need for this student, this child, to have this position. There's just a teacher's gut feeling. And I've been wrong sometimes. And students have said, no, I don't want, they've turned it down. I don't want to do that. It's not for me. And I would have to choose someone else. But most often they accept the role, and it has been a chance for them to expand. Either they're already leaders and they need a chance, a platform to work harder, more expansively, or they're leaders and they've never been given a chance, and there's a seed in them that I think I see, and we give them that opportunity. And then they choose their own cabinets. And I tell them, you can choose your best friend if you want to, but that person may not be good for that job. So choose the person in the room who can do the job for you the best. And we've inverted the equation. Usually when you're choosing sides, the person who's picked last always feels badly. I know I was a little fat kid, and I was always chosen last for sports. We turned it around, and simply by a fiction, I say to them, you know, as our dwindling pool of potential resources to choose from gets smaller, their value goes up. So the people who are left become more important to you, more potentially powerful assets to you. So the last person who's there, the last couple of people, they're feeling pretty important, pretty powerful that they're being they're being saved for last. So that's kind of the way it's worked out over time, and it's been very good, actually. There's been a great success in that. And lately I've been working with students I don't know well. I have to spend an hour or two getting to know them. There has to be that relationship before we can have any success. And I get to know them and then make those tentative decisions on who should be playing those roles.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Darren, who works with a non-governmental organization that involves working with Israeli and Palestinian children. So his question is around, have you had experience of where children bring in their own or their parents' prejudices and play them out in the context of the game?
Always. Always. We're humans. We can't avoid it. And even young people, I mean, their imaginations are colonized even at the age of 9 by Hollywood and Madison Avenue advertising agencies. I ask them to do a creative writing activity, and they're so excited. And I say, the only thing is, no monsters, pets, aliens, explosions, no one gets hurt, no one gets killed. And they say, well, what are we going to write about then? There's nothing left. And I realize that their own original thoughts are covered over by so much from our culture already that my job really is to kind of unseat conventions, to destroy convention, really, to unsettle their easy leanings and tendencies that they've been given by someone else. So working with students from other cultures, they bring in that package. And the game is designed to be so confusing, really. Every way they turn, there's no way out. The first stage of the game is always complete despair. The game is designed to fail massively at first. Whatever prejudice you bring to the game is going to exacerbate that failure. You will become worse and worse. And in that despair, I'm there to gently protect them as they go down that dark place. In their despair, they realize that what they have been taught, what they think is the way of right and good and proper, does not work. They've got to create new solutions based on only one thing. One individual cannot do it, so they have to turn to each other and become collaborators. Can you help me do this? I can't do it alone. My way, my parents' way, the way we do it in my culture doesn't work. There is no culture that has a solution for us all that has worked so far. At least we've not seen it. I've not. So they help each other, and they develop a stage of hyper-collaboration after they get a few successes. And soon they become this kind of one thing. They merge at a place I call the click. They suddenly become one entity, and they see the game as one problem that they're all working on, rather than being against each other as I posited them at the beginning of the game. The game begins with them pitted against each other every way possible, militarily, socially, economically, and they've got to think their way out of those situations, but they can't. They're on the verge of warfare everywhere they turn. And so the only way out is inward to each other. And if you have a cultural piece or an ethnic piece or a personal piece that can help us do that, that's great. And if one of those pieces gets in the way, it's going to be exposed as an obstacle without me preaching or teaching anything. They see through the clarity of their own experience. And I don't have to have my baggage, my prejudices. Do the right thing. Peace is best. Don't fight. Although I believe in those things, they can't get in the way because the students decide. They have control. So yes, those things do come in, but I have such faith that they will just, by the complexity of the problem really, be pushed to a new place, deeper place, beyond their own limitations of culture, family, and become a new thing right in front of us.
Okay, thank you. A question from Alana, who works in diversity and inclusion in education. And she wondered, what goal did you have in mind in giving the student who gets into trouble the role of the saboteur? And does that serve to label the student further, even in his or her own mind?
Right. Well, the student doesn't know that I'm choosing them because they are a troublemaker. I just come to them and say, would you do the job? They might know they're a troublemaker, but they don't know why I'm asking them. And the idea in my mind is that not that I applaud their misbehavior, but that I don't go against their tendency and inclination. It's a kind of a martial arts trick. In martial arts, I've heard you'll have a force coming like this, and instead of meeting it with an equal and opposite force, you simply guide it and take it past into a new direction. So I try and say, well, we have that skill set. It hasn't done much good for us, but let's see if we can turn it to some good for all of us. And so sure enough, that student happily takes the role because they're not denied their nature. And the most interesting transformation occurs in their badness in the role, in their seeking to undermine everything. They actually develop, it's strange, they develop compassion because they really want to help others have a better experience. They really want to do their best job making things tough so that others can have a better experience. They actually end up playing for others. At first it looks like they're playing against them, but the great saboteurs, the one you'll see in the film and the film clips, Caden, had a huge heart, huge compassion. He was always in the office, but he had a huge heart. By the end of the game, the students mobbed him. They swarmed over him. Caden, you were so great. You helped us be better. You helped us be stronger. And it was a beautiful thing to see a student who's considered a bad student be considered positively in that way by their peers and by their teachers. And we didn't deny them. We didn't try and suppress or force down. We simply tried to find a better use, a better way of their natural, deep core tendencies. It are not necessarily bad. They're just simply misdirected, I think. And so that's how that goes. They don't know that they're considered bad students, or we consider them a valuable asset, really, and that's how we treat them.
Great, thank you. A related question from Alana is around how much knowledge of global issues does a student need to get the most out of the game?
Wonderful question, Alana. This is also a very strange thing. I'll tell you, the students who play this game, every time we play it for 35 years, have no preparation whatsoever, no vocabulary, and they're using a very high level of vocabulary. They have no background in studies in geography or history or anything. They're thrown into it, into the deep end, and they must swim. I use vocabulary in context, repeated use of words in context as I explain things, as I answer questions, as I point out, illuminate, and as I repeat and support things that have happened. I reiterate a lot of what they've just done. Sir, do you mean to say that you've done this? Or madam, are you saying that you have instituted this diplomatic action for such and such reason? And that's repeated so often in the game. That's really my major function, is to ask questions of clarification. And they get that, and they begin to pick it up, and they speak it themselves. And I'll have you know, the most fascinating thing, we're in the Pentagon, talking to a room full of generals and Defense Secretary Panetta, and we have a mock press conference, and the press secretary, George Little, who's fielding questions in this press conference from my students stumped him twice, asking questions. He said, I cannot answer that question. I'm going to have to ask the State Department to look into that because I can't. And the questions about first strike capability against countries developing nuclear weapons capability, that kind of thing. Whose responsibility is it, and what is the Pentagon's response to such situation? Students were prepared then. We prepared after the game for that particular instance. But before the game, the less, the better. Actually, it's an odd, contradictory kind of approach to things, contrarian approach. But the less they have, the more emptiness and space they bring, the greater their success is.
Very interesting. I suppose, as you say, you assume it's the opposite, that the more knowledge they have, the better it will be, but it's not so in practice.
That's right. I think in our society today, at least here, we believe that knowledge and information, the amount of it, and the facilitation and use of it is one's worth, is the worth of a person. But, you know, my students from 15, 20, 30 years who are contacting me now through social media like this even, are saying, Mr. Hunter, the real point of the World Peace Game is to help me become a better person. I'm a better person. I'm more loving. I'm kind. I am kinder to people. I'm more compassionate. That was the hidden purpose we didn't really know then. We thought it was about politics and getting scores on tests and doing better in school. It was about becoming a higher quality person that can help others. And I didn't know that was the purpose of it either until the students began to show me that. That was the real point of our playing. You know, you can have so much knowledge and be a horrible person. You know, you can have great amounts of facility and intellectual activities and still not be a kind person. So we find that to be a subtle issue that's even more important than the overt issue sometimes.
Okay. We have a question relating to, I suppose, using the World Peace Game with different age groups. Do you have advice about how to deal with complex issues with students of different ages?
Well, you know, I never give advice first because I have no clue as to your situation. I couldn't possibly know what's right for you, so I wouldn't dream of doing it. But I have to say I have played the game with many different age groups, and even in the summers I have an academy that's held in different parts of the U.S. and once in Bergen, Norway, with people from different age groups mixed together. So in some groups we have a 9-year-old prime minister, 17-year-old secretary of state, a 14-year-old minister of defense, and a 12-year-old CFO or chief financial officer. And I always choose the younger students to be prime ministers, and they can, of course, decline. But it's been a fabulous experience. We've done it at a number of summer academies, 5-day intensive, 3 hours a day. And it's been the most amazing teaching, most amazing learning, pardon me, I've ever seen. It's astounding. And we asked for advice for dealing with different age groups. What I've found is they are the advice givers. They are the answer. My high school students play a most sophisticated game, the most amazing game I could ever imagine. There's no doubt in my mind that my high school students could save this planet. No doubt whatsoever. I've seen them do it relentlessly in practical, reasonable ways so many times against every obstacle I could create, a random card system could create and throw at them. They always manage to creatively and practically save the world. I know that high school students can help us. It's an untapped resource. We think they're not worth anything. They have nothing to contribute until they're out of school, out of university, and in the world. And even then, they've got to earn their way through. But, you know, there's so much help waiting for us in our own classrooms. When I teach, I've got a classroom of 25, 30 students playing the game. That's 25 or 30 co-teachers. These are 25, 30 peers. I always say when we start a lesson, what shall we do? Folks, let's look at this together. You know, it's never a thing of I have to come in and tell them what to do and what's going on. We know we have to cover this topic. How shall we best do it? What are all the obstacles we can encounter? We brainstorm them. Now, what are all the solutions we can come up with that solve these obstacles? We brainstorm them. And we always succeed because they are in control. It's their life, their project, their work, and they feel empowered because they can do what they feel they need to do for themselves. So I look to the students for that. I can't possibly give any advice. I can tell you my experiences, but they have the answer, and it's different every time.
Okay. A question from Georgia, who works in the Equality Authority. Does the game require a lot of training for teachers, or in your experience, have teachers felt comfortable enough to give it a go?
You know, we're just at that stage. You know, this film came out in 2010, and until then, I worked alone. Nobody, you know, a person or two would come in to see what I was doing for a few minutes and leave, and no one had ever seen the entire game until Chris Farina came along. So just 3 years ago now, the game became known beyond our school walls. And so now we're beginning to get requests from people. Can we learn this? Can we do this? Is it possible? And I'm really torn. I don't know, honestly, to be honest with you. I'd like to think so. I hope so. I know that the basic tool is the facilitator's knowledge and relationship with the students. I don't think it could just be an open kind of game you play with anyone anytime for a little while. That there really has to be a relationship. It's about relationships. So without that, it's not really possible, in my view, to do well at this game. Students have to have an intellectual stamina to be able to stay in that kind of unknown, to be comfortable in the unknown for long periods of time. They have to be able to learn to thrive in the unknown with no answers given, to make and create their own way. Not everybody can or wants to do that. But those who do, I'm thinking as a facilitator, the thing that I've understood, I guess, is first you really have to care about them as individuals. You really have to care who they are and treat them as peers. I wouldn't say equals. I mean, not all things are equal, but they're your friends, they're your peers, they're people who have a great wisdom beyond yours in a different package. And so with that attitude going in, you can then think about how to facilitate in your own self being in a space where you don't know the answer. I live in that space all the time. I go in every day with a little trepidation thinking, I'm going to be at a place where I don't know what to do or say. I don't know what the appropriate thing is. I've got to depend on this group dynamic, this collective wisdom to be able to help us through. And hopefully my intuition will kick in when needed. But essentially, I go in and have a self-reflection period every time. I have to look at my own prejudices that leap up, my own biases. Don't do that. I don't want you to do, that's not, I can't say that because it's their game, but I feel a resistance to, they're going into warfare. That's not right. They're withholding a peace agreement. Why are they doing that? That's not right, I think. But then they always show me another way, sometimes through the obstacle, sometimes around the obstacle, sometimes they dissolve the obstacle. So if I try to put my agenda, my wisdom, my knowledge on top of what's supposed to happen, I always muddy the waters. And they've got to decide. So self-introspection is a practice I have to do continually to be able to be clear enough, to be unbiased enough, to be supportive enough of whatever they do in going through their experience to come out the other side, even when they're failing and I know that they're failing. I know that what they're going to do is going to go wrong. I have to allow it because that's true learning for them. It makes the entire game go downhill for a while, and we're all very sad. And my heart is breaking again. But experience has taught me, they have taught me, they always come out right together. Okay. And so that's, I guess, we're hoping others will follow. We're looking at virtual possibilities, which I'm not sure are the right way to go, honestly, because of that visceral relationship you have to have. I'm not sure that translates on a smartphone or on a web platform. But there are people in Silicon Valley who've offered to look into it for us, and we'll see what happens. I'm trying to just allow and be clear myself without my own biases as to what is the best thing for the game. We do have master classes. Teachers from around the world come and sit with me for a couple of days or 5 days, and we go into the practice of the World Peace Game and also into their own practice as well. It appears that it's about the World Peace Game, but it really isn't. The World Peace Game is a Trojan horse, and in that Trojan horse is a mirror for every teacher's individual practice. That's what I think is the greatest good of what we're trying to offer.
Great, thank you. You seem to have captured people's imagination with the role of the saboteur. So we have another question on that.
Yeah, they like that.
So the question is, have you ever given the role to a well-behaved child who normally follows all the rules?
Not likely to, no. I've had those children who heard about the game before they got asked to do it. Mr. Hunter, please pick me to be the saboteur. Please, I want to be the bad boy. I want to be the bad girl. Can you let me do it? And it's always based on my feeling of what's needed for the game, who's needed in that role for the game. And it's a secret thing, and they contact me through email or by phone or with secret notes, whatever. And I have had students, the bad boy who became so dedicated and compassionate to the others that he sacrificed himself in the game. This is unheard of for a little bad boy to do. He sacrificed himself in the game so that others could succeed and could win. He overheard people talking as we were leaving a session that they suspected him of being a saboteur, and they're going to have a trial the next day. You have a trial, and they have a saboteur. And they can bring accusations, and people can defend him or accuse, and then we sort all it out. We take a vote, and then we have to ask him. In the game, you ask, and they reveal whether they are or not. So he was afraid they were going to find him out the next day, and he was so downhearted because he loved the role of being the bad boy. He loved it. He didn't want to give it up, but he thought in a phone call to me late at night, Mr. Hunter, they're going to find me out. I don't want this role to stop. This is too important to the game. What can we do? I didn't know what to tell him. So he thought for a while, and he said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to reveal myself to my best friend who's playing on another team. I'm going to make him the next saboteur. So if they catch me, he'll be the saboteur. And I said, you're taking an awful chance. We call it falling on your own sword. If they find you out, this best friend could reveal you tomorrow, and you're gone anyway, and you don't gain anything. He said, I know, but I've got to take the chance for the game. The game has to have a saboteur. Sure enough, the next day he was caught, tried, and outed. And as he was stepping down from his office, he turned and he said, you know, I'll have you all know that there's still a saboteur. I have appointed a sleeper saboteur. So the role of saboteur will continue in this game because the role of this danger is important. And he stepped down. You know, there's so many funny stories like that. But yeah, the good guys want to try it too, but it depends on what the game needs, I think.
Okay. Just a few comments for you, John, that are coming in. One of our participants, thanks you, found the webinar very illuminating and really liked the way that you encourage kids in their own space and give them time for reflection on dominant discourses. They're comparing it to Freire, so that's it's a good comparison, I think.
Comparing it to what? I didn't quite hear you.
Paulo Freire.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm not even same country. I'm the same world. No, please. But you know, it's the children who do it. They're the ones.
Yes. And another message saying thank you for a fantastic and informative webinar, and people are looking forward to the book and the movie being available in Ireland. So I think if that's everybody's questions at this stage, we might just wrap up. Is there anything you want to add at the end, John?
Sure. I mean, teachers, we love to talk, so I'll end briefly with first, thank you and a deep gratitude to Amnesty International and to you, Kathy, for having the insight, the vision to host this kind of meeting, and to all the teachers and educators who are listening. Thank you so much for your efforts. I mean, it's almost a thankless job sometimes, and you're vilified, and I don't know if people really appreciate the noble calling that it really is. And what you do is so important. And what you do, even in an offhand gesture or an offhand comment, can have the impact that lasts for decades, can 30 years later go on to change someone's life, and they remember where it came from. It came from you. And that might even carry over into generations past. So every action you take, in my experience, is so important. Even in the bad days, the worst times, the actions that don't seem fruitful, there's some good to them, and they can carry over time. We might not even live to see them. But all that good does amount to something in the long run. So thank you for your efforts in trying to help the future come along and save us all, hopefully.
Thank you so much, John. I know I speak for everybody when I say thank you for a really fantastic and insightful presentation. And we could talk all day about the joy of teaching. And as you say, those moments when you don't even notice you're having an impact that lasts with the students long into their lives. Finally, just a quote from one of our participants that I think sort of sums up the whole webinar for us, that you've given us real hope for what's possible in education. So thank you again so much. I would encourage all of the participants to check out your website, try and get your hands on the film and the book when it comes out. There's a link to a trailer that you can see on the slide there, and it's only 3 minutes long, but it gives you a really good flavor of the film. So
yeah.
Thanks very much again, John.
Oh, you're welcome. There's an 8-minute trailer also, and you know, better than the trailer, I'd love to come to Ireland someday and talk to you.
I'm sure there's a ready audience for you here.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you, Amnesty International. Thank you, Jenny. Thank all of you for taking the time. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to let the rest of the participants know, this has been recorded, and I will make the recording available to you via email in the coming days. And please do join us again in February for our next webinar. I'll be in touch with you with details about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye.